I was on that drug, I became incredibly depressed and suicidal. My hair fell out. I gained about 30 pounds in 2 months. I had all of the hot flashes, the night sweats, but I also had like panic attacks, insomnia. I had vertigo. I would see things. I would hear things. I had no sense of like spatial recognition, like balance, was all off. My depth perception, all of that stuff. And I literally thought that I was going crazy. And so, after my time with Lupron was up, they wanted to do another cycle. I was like, absolutely not. Um, and they just got to a point where they literally said to me, well, we don't know what else to do with you. And so imagine that, you literally have a medical team saying, well, we did the surgery. We don't know what else, to do with you. And so I was kind of at that point left to figure it out. After all of these visits and having this nervous breakdown and ending up in therapy, that I did kind of turn to the internet to try to help figure this out, because at that point, the doctors were not of any help. And that is when I discovered some of the online groups on Facebook where I met Arielle online, where I met Madelyn, where I met Vanessa online, and just through forming those relationships. And it was actually through a recommendation from one of the ladies in the Facebook groups of how I found my specialist. And it was after about another 2 or 3 years of just going through random doctors that this girl said, hey, try this doctor. He's a specialist. I went and I saw him, and he'd been my specialist for the next 10 years to come after that. And so about 3 years later, I was diagnosed with adenomyosis, which you guys know they often call that like the sister disease or the companion disease to endometriosis. And immediately at the day of my diagnosis in the doctor's visit, they tried to schedule me for a hysterectomy that same day. Um, and I absolutely not at that point. I didn't have any children. I was still trying to fight for my fertility. And I'm like, we've got to try something else. But just the emotional, you tell someone who doesn't have kids, who wants kids, you got this disease, and let's schedule a hysterectomy the same. Like, I haven't even had time to process what you just told me about this secondary disease now. And now you want to, give me it was really emotionally overwhelming. And I felt like there was no support from the doctors or anybody. It was just like, here, let's just cut on you some more. And I'm like, I just got cut on a couple years ago. Let me think this through. Long story short, found a specialist who was willing to work with me, who knew I wanted to preserve my fertility. And so for 5 years, we worked together and tried a variety of options that they all worked to one degree or another. But for me, unfortunately, the disease continued to progress. And then in May of 2018, coming up on almost 3 years ago, unfortunately, I did come to terms and have to make the decision to get a hysterectomy, because as you guys know, as far as adenomyosis is concerned, hysterectomy is the cure for that. And it just got to a point where it was literally a life or death situation. The medications that I was taking to help control the pain started to interfere with my liver function. It started to interfere with other aspects of my health. And I had to just literally make the decision to say, okay, as painful as this is, I can live without a uterus. I can't live without a functioning liver or kidney. And so I grappled with that decision for about a year, 5 years leading up to that. But for about a year, I grappled with that decision. And then I finally had to make the choice. And it was difficult, but 3 years, almost 3 years out, that was absolutely the best decision for me. I've been about 95% pain free since 2018. My endometriosis is still controlled. I remember when I did have my surgery, the surgeon said there's no new occurrences of any endometriosis. I did have some small fibroids and some bowel involvement, but the endo has still been suppressed. I do still have my right ovary, although I don't have the fallopian tube. So they put me back on birth control, not as a cure, but because they didn't want to throw me into like early menopause, or kind of like as a hormonal balance. For me, that was the easiest way to do things. But like Arielle mentioned, all of these treatments, it's an ongoing thing, right? Birth control worked for me at one time marvelously for years. But what I've realized in the past year or so, it's now affecting my blood pressure. Like all of my thyroid, my liver, my everything's great. My blood pressure is high. Through process of elimination, we've deduced that the likely contributor is the birth control pills. And so now I'm looking at, again, coming off the birth control pills in order to save my blood pressure. But how is that going to now affect the endo? And so I think that when we start talking about terms of treatment plans, it's necessary to point out that this thing is a living, breathing, moving thing, right? It's cyclical, and like the treatment plan that worked for you 2 years ago may have run its course, and you may have to look for something. I think, Arielle, you mentioned last week at some point you may need another surgery, but you're exploring other options in the meantime. And that's kind of, I think, Tara, all you ladies can attest to that, is that, diet may work fabulously for a few years and then it may stop. This holistic treatment may work for a while, and then as your symptoms progress, you may need to explore something else. And even now, 13 years into this diagnosis, that's what I'm finding, is that no one size fits all, no one treatment plan fits all, and even a treatment option that worked for you last year or last month may not work for you now. So it's a constant learning and constant evolving in learning how to have a substantial quality of life with this disease.
Michelle, let me ask you this. Thank you for sharing that. As you saw me nodding my head
Mm-hmm.
in agreement, this is a sensitive subject, even for myself. I haven't really delved too much in it, talked to anyone about it. I don't know if you have, Arielle, Tara. I don't know if you have kids, you guys, but I don't have kids. And when I had that option to have a hysterectomy, I fought like crazy, like you, Michelle. Fought like crazy, and finally, the body just gave out. And my practitioner, my doctor, honestly told me, he was like, freeze your eggs, do this and that. But at the time, insurance wasn't, I ain't had the insurance that I have now. And by that time, I'm in the hospital with a central and lost so much blood transfusion. He said, you can't go any further. I did the Lupron and all the Depo-Provera, all that. So like you said, there is no one size fit all, right? And there's no cure, just subjective treatment. What works for you may not work for me. Some people would suggest getting a hysterectomy. Some people suggest having a baby, and so forth. And I said all of that to say this. You said something so interesting, and that was having a child. How are you dealing with that infertility?
That was very difficult for me. I was diagnosed, although my symptoms started from preteen early on, I was not diagnosed until I was 33. And I had my hysterectomy at 41, 42. So I fought from 38 to 42.
Yeah.
I fought, or from like 35 to 40, I fought. And it was hard for me because I didn't have children. And that was something that was always, always a part of my plan. And that was one of the reasons that I fought so, so hard against it. But in my case, and here was what was so frustrating. I was told, because I was over 40 or close to 40, that harvesting my eggs would not be a good idea. I was considered geriatric in terms of OB-GYN. Basically, they were like, your eggs are too old to be harvested because you're 40, you're over 40, you're close to 40. And that was insulting and degrading and very hurtful. So I didn't even have that option for the IVF. That was taken off the table for me. The other thing is, in my case, the disease had literally eaten a hole in the back of my uterus. And so my doctor said that if by some miracle I were able to conceive, as the baby grew, that hole would grow. And so there essentially would be nothing for the baby to attach to. And so I literally would be putting my life and the life of the unborn child at danger, right? That was something that I did not, want to risk or do it, or to selfishly try to move forward with, and possibly leave a child with no mother, and possibly harm a child out of my need or desire to be a mom. I struggled. I did go into a depression. I ended up back in therapy because of that. And I think at the time, when I had the hysterectomy, I was so focused on the physical aspect of healing, right? Because hysterectomy it's a serious process. People call it an outpatient procedure, but it can take anywhere from 3 months to a full year to fully recover internally. And so for me, I think initially I put that in the back of my mind, right? Because everybody was like, oh, you can adopt, you can foster. So I'm like, I've got options on the table, right? But in that moment, I was so physically focused on the physical healing.
Yes.
And I'll be honest with you guys, I was literally one night watching American Horror Story. That's one of my favorite shows. And there was a scene, I don't know if any of you guys watched that show, but there was a scene where one of the characters was pregnant and she was giving birth to like this weird ghost baby thing or whatever.
Mhm.
And I had seen American Horror, so I had binged this show dozens of times, but for whatever reason this night I was watching this scene and I'm watching her breathing and crying and going through, and it just hit me. I would never, and I just bust out bawling in the middle
Mhm.
of my bed with the and watching this TV show because I was like, even though she was having a difficult, that is something that I would never, ever, ever experience. People talk about, oh, the labor pains and the labor stories. I was like, I will never, ever, ever experience that. I would never have, even if I adopt, even if I foster, I would never have the pregnancy experience, right? And people, and I had to deal, and I just broke down. And I realized that, and it dawned on me that it was like months after the procedure, and I never allowed myself to grieve that. I just
Mm.
put it in the back of I never allowed, and so I went back into therapy, and it took me months and months and to work through that process. And I'm better now, but I still have moments. Like I said, if I'm watching a movie or I'll see my friends, and now some of my friends are now becoming grandparents, right?
Yeah.
So I would say most, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say 80, 90% of the time I'm okay. But even now, even almost 3 years later, I still have my moments because I feel that the disease robbed me of that choice, right? It
Yes.
is one
Yes.
thing to make a conscious parenting decision to say, I choose not to have kids, or kids are not something that's for me, right? And we have people that do that. But if that is something that you have dreamed about and something that you have wanted and something that you have worked into
Yes.
your life plan, right?
Yes.
And then to have that pulled away from you through no choice or option or volition of your own,
Mhm.
it's devastating. And people try to be helpful and, oh girl, you can come take my kids, oh, they say, and it's like that's not helpful. Oh, you don't want
Yeah.
these badass kids anyway. But that's my choice to make. That's for me to decide, right?
Yeah.
That should have been my choice to make,
Yes.
and that choice was taken from me. And so
Mhm.
I totally agree with you, Vanessa, that it is still a struggle some days because, like I said, some of my friends are grandparents. So you see the kids growing up, and you see the prom, and you see them going off to college, and you like, that is an experience
Mhm.
I'll never have. And then even looking into adoption is not cheap. Adoption is expensive.
Mhm.
It's even more so of a hurdle if you are Black. It's
Yep.
even more so a hurdle if you are a Black single mother wanting
Correct.
to adopt. And
Yes.
I'll be honest, when I started researching and I looked into the costs and the fees, and I was like, there's no way I can do this by myself. I know a lot of women do, God bless them. But for me, taking inventory of, how that would affect my life and what would, you know, that option was taken off the table
Yeah.
for me, at least at this point. You know what I'm saying? And so
Mhm.
adoption isn't easy. It isn't cheap. There have been stories about adoptive mothers who change their minds or they decide to fight. There are all kind of obstacles. None of these options are easy. But
Yes.
yeah, it is still very difficult, and I totally empathize because I have been there for all the ladies who have wanted to have children, and this disease um, has absolutely robbed them of that.
Mhm.
I think that is something, and my therapist said to me, that is something that'll always be with you, even years from now. You may still have moments where you cry or where you are affected by it. When Mother's Day comes around, it's like, you know. And
Mhm.
people are like, you have godkids, you have nieces, you have nephews, and I do, and I love them all, but it's not exact. It's not the same. It's not
You're
the
right.
same. And so I think that is something that I will be dealing with to one degree or another. Always.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. I want to circle back to you, but I want to get, we call it respectfully. Dr. Arielle Dance. So let me bring her on. I want to go ahead and leapfrog, and I want you to answer that same question. Um, how did you, and Tara too, this goes for you too. I want to get to you next. And let me just make some quick acknowledgement. I want to thank Linda for joining us. I want to thank Amanda for joining us. It's you guys. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. And I want to make mention that Cherese, hopefully she will be able to join us tonight. Something came up and it's had her temporary delay. So hopefully she'll join us tonight. So Michelle, hold it right there. I want to leapfrog back to you. I have some more questions, but I really want to go ahead and talk to Arielle, Dr. Arielle, about her stance on, do she have kids? And if she doesn't have kids, how is she dealing with that? Infertility is the question.
I do not have kids, and I usually do not talk about infertility or my fertility journey. I usually skip the fertility discussions when I go to conferences.
Mm-hmm.
This is not my jam. I think I mentioned on the our last chat, I was diagnosed at 15. And so when you're a teenager and someone says you have this grown-up disease and you probably will never have kids. As a teenager, that's a lot to digest. But also it like put me in the mindset, well, then that's fine. Like, I'll just never have kids. And so I had decided I didn't want kids. I wasn't having kids. And I was like, okay with that. And never decided to find out if I could have kids. And then I got married. I'm married. I have a wife. Thank you. And my wife is a school social worker, and she's all about the kids. She just wants kids all the time around us. And I just keep saying I don't want kids. And, that doesn't really work out when someone like really wants kids. And then you're like, but I don't want kids. So we just don't talk about it. So like, we have to acknowledge it. But I also mentioned that I've had blood clots. And when I was diagnosed with blood clots, first time from birth control pills, the second time we suspected clotting disorder. They said, one, your clotting disorder would make it hard for you to get pregnant and stay pregnant. And then if you ever do get pregnant, you'd be at high risk of getting blood clots again, and you could die. So then I'm like, okay, it seems like my body is giving me all the red flags of like, maybe it's not meant for you to carry a baby. And again, I was like, okay. Like, I've just come to terms with like, maybe this isn't for me. But again, I have a wife who's like, I really want kids. And so we've come to terms with the fact that adoption would be our go-to if we decide to have kids. But to Michelle's point, we are two Black women trying to get a baby. And one, it's not cheap. And two, it's not necessarily always the easiest when you're facing a few different barriers. So I don't know where I am when it comes to fertility. I try not to talk about it. And not because it upsets me, but just because I just don't want to. I don't know. I have suspected adenomyosis, and I'm just like, I don't talk about that either. The adenomyosis scares me because I'm in my 30s and have no desire to get a hysterectomy anytime soon because I don't want to have another surgery again. Like that. So I just like, there's things that I'm just like, I just don't want to right now because there's too many things happening in the world and life is just, so like.
Okay, I understand that. I understand that.
Maybe.
She is. Right there, Tara, because I want to talk about infertility. She doesn't want to talk about it. I get that. I understand.
No. I'm just saying I don't want to talk about it. I'm just saying I avoid it often, and not for any reason, just because I think I've come to terms with it's not for me.
From my perspective, let me get to you, Tara. I noticed I found her dancing on YouTube, and it really inspired me. And then you reached out to me. I think you did some kind of research on endometriosis for African-American women. And when you did that, I was so enthused. I was so appreciative of that. Can you give us what's going on with that? How did that work out for you? What was the reception?
That's good. That was almost 10 years ago now, that study, during my master's program. And I really did get to talk to women who had endometriosis, women of color specifically. So Black women, Latina women, and South Asian women. And I think we can go down a very interesting rabbit hole of the cultural things about period shame and when you first get diagnosed with endometriosis, how people, and I think Tara, you talked about this, they say it could be a STD, like the shame of that. Um, and you're like, but I wasn't even having sex. And you're like, but people want to put that kind of shame on you for some reason, rather than trying to really figure out what's going on with your body. And so just a lot of really beautiful things, but really what I love about doing research and talking to people is hearing their stories. And I think that's what you're doing right now. We don't even realize, but right now you're doing some type of research. You just want to hear people's stories. And I think what's missing a lot from the endometriosis world, and we're getting to it now though, is oral history and hearing people's stories and wanting to know what your experience was like versus your experience versus your experience, because that also determines how we treat people and how doctors treat us differently. And so that's
I
my favorite
concur.
part.
Doctors. Now that's another topic altogether, but I'm gonna get to Tara in a minute. Doctors, not educated. Doctors not listening to us about endometriosis and how we feel and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Is frustrating. And I mentioned last week, I had to regroup and find me another physician. One doctor told me, I think over 12 years ago, if a doctor does not listen to his patient, don't stay. And I took that. He's gone on to be with the Lord now, and I took that to heart. Every time somebody does not address my issue or they shrug me off, and I know we are in unprecedented, crazy times right now, and doctors are busy and they're overwhelmed. I get that. That's why I do majority of my research, my body, and I keep things journal and things like that. So when I go to him and present the situation, and he doesn't act like he care. Or just last year, ladies, for example, I was telling someone about my pain. And he said, oh, he's over these facilities, about 4 of them. He's over all these facilities. And I told him how the medicine does not work now. Like you said, Michelle, it worked at one point, but it no longer works. So they think you drug seeking, So he said this, ladies, literally, and I have a witness to prove it. He said my pain wasn't real and it was in my head. I said, what did you say? Can you repeat that? Your pain is not real as head. And it was winter. Got my coat up, ladies. Put my arms in my sleeves. And I ain't have a doctor to go to. I know I didn't. Got my coat and I said to him, what I just told you. My doctor said, if you don't listen to me, then don't stay. He gets up and he says, I'm sorry, I apologize. I said, no, you just said what was in your heart. I'm glad you did, because I don't belong here. I stayed too long. I got my coat. Didn't go back. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. I need help. Endometriosis is a beast, ladies. You know that. I need help. And this facility came up. I've never been there in my life. And I'm pausing because it was amazing how it was introduced to me. I've never been there, but when I got there, I began to speak to that physician. And she sat there and she looked at me as I began to talk. And I told her my experience. And she says, that's not going to happen here. She says, because I have endometriosis. My caretaker has endometriosis, so she knows what's going on, you guys. I no longer have to act like nobody don't care. I'm not panicky and all that. It's something I just had surgery about 4 months ago, and she took care of me. She really did. And I just want to say that to those who are listening, you don't have to linger. I know you get frustrated. I know you get tired. Don't linger in a place that no one appreciates you. Go where you tolerate, go where you appreciate it. And that holds true for your doctors too. And if you find yourself a good doctor, and I talk to my friend like this all the time, you find yourself a good doctor, stay there, find them. But Arielle, I find it, why do doctors leave? The good ones are leaving. They don't stay long. I cannot find a good one.
They get tired. They spend so much time training other people and then they get tired.
That's what it is. They burn out. I figured that. That's why I pray for my doctors too. I really do. So having said that, when the ladies approach you, when you approach them for the questionnaires, was there any hesitancy? Did they not want to talk, reveal anything? Because I was kind of quiet with mine. I didn't want to talk about it. I was kind of embarrassed about it, And like you, I didn't talk about infertility. Why? I just didn't want to at the time, but now I feel like it's time for me to talk about it, and to assist those who are wanting kids but can't have kids. I will speak my journey and what works for me And then you get the evidence. Michelle said something so great when people said, be careful how you talk to someone who's dealing with infertility issues. Don't say my kids. I know they don't mean any harm about that, but you should research things. Take the time to research how to talk to someone who is experiencing these things. We don't want to hear my cousin, you got nieces and nephews, although we appreciate it, you know, and aunts are like moms, they really are. But Michelle won't experience that journey herself. But I told God when I was about 15 or 16, be careful. I said, that look like it's painful having kids. Oh God, that's look painful. That hurts. I said, I'm gonna get me a surrogate. And God said, okay, I'm gonna get you one. And that's what happened, you guys. I don't have one, but in the future, that's my option. When I get married, my option, and I know if God wants me to adopt, I have no issues with that either. But my option is to get married one day and me and my husband come together, find a surrogate, and he will be the donor. And that's me. That's my journey. For those who are listening, you can be a mom anyway. I really do feel that. And I understand what Michelle said. It's painful when you really want to and you waited a long time. But I've resolved not to carry that. I don't want that burden. I don't want it. And I let it go. I released it. And I feel free. And I know what's right for me. It feels good. So having said that, was there any ladies hesitant to talk to you about with this research that you've done with them?
I think in any of my research, and my most recent one, I think, again, if I had mentioned it before, you're hearing it again, was with coping with endometriosis, so meditation practices for endometriosis. So in both of those, I asked people to just share their story. How do you cope with pain? What are you feeling? And on all of that. But some people, and you know this from talking with other people who've had endometriosis, some people love to talk about their experience with endometriosis. Some of us are very open about talking about all the bleeding and all the feelings and all the crying nights and all the sleeping. We don't mind talking about it. And then other people, you won't know. They'll pull you aside and say, I have that too.
Yes, yes.
You don't know. I mean, I've had women pull me aside in church and say, I had that when I was your age. Yes. But they're not going to say it in front of a crowd. You know, it's a private thing for some people. That's bedroom talk. That's bathroom talk. You know, there's some stigma around endometriosis still. And I mean, for those of us who are advocates in this community, we're loud about it. You know, I realized one of my friends, she said, you talk about periods all the time, so I know I can come to you with this. And I'm like, yep, I'm the vagina girl. Come and talk to me. I mean, obviously, like, I'm that one you come to when you have those questions, but everyone's not as out loud spoken about like their personal things. And I've realized that. So, and it's okay. We don't have to be. So to answer you, yes, some people are really open about things and some people are more hush hush and on various things. So infertility, they may be quiet about, but they want to talk to you all about their pain medication. So it just, you never know.
You never know. Hold it right there, Arielle. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm gonna bounce back to you also. I want to bring in the cake wearing Tara herself. How are you, Tara? Let's go, let's go.
Yes, thanks. I'm glad to be back with you guys again tonight.
Welcome, sis. I'm glad we connected again.
You. Absolutely.
Okay. So I don't know if you have any kids or aspiring to. What is your journey with infertility?
Yeah, so I kind of find myself, oddly as it is to say, like one foot on each side. So I do have two daughters, 26 and 23.
Wow.
So I'm blessed. I'm very happy about that. I had them very young. I had a childhood of adversity, so probably was finding the love from a father in a place I shouldn't have been early. I own that. Gotcha. Nevertheless, you know, I've been out on my own since I was 16, still finished high school and went on to college, raised them. But then when I was mature enough, after all the battle with the endo and got married, I wanted to purposely have a child. I was young then. I didn't really enjoy, or I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy, I didn't stop to enjoy the moments that I would have as a mature adult, right? I was too busy with stress and things of a young adult trying to be an adult, right? So then that's when some of the endo was at its worst. And I did actually go ahead and go through IVF because we couldn't naturally with my endo. And we had quite the experience. We, my husband at the time, we're divorced now, but he's African American as well. So I got a little bit of a taste of how different the Black and people of color community are treated.
Yes.
Saw that firsthand. All fun and games when you just coming in and me, and then you can see a whole different aspect when you bring your husband or your partner in, right? Wife. But then on top of that, we did go through in vitro, and we had, I think somewhere we ended up around 8 embryos. I tested positive as a cystic fibrosis carrier, which, if you know anything about that, you have a 1 in 4 chance if your partner also is a carrier. And so the doctor was like, you know what, that's just pretty much a Caucasian disease. There's no way he's probably a carrier. Guess what happened? He was a carrier. So then what that means is they have to do PGD testing on all the embryos. So I battled the insurance because that was another extra cost. It's already expensive to do fertility treatments, right? And we did get that approved. So the doctor, I don't know how they extricate cells to send off for testing, but they did all 8, sent it to the lab in Chicago. And I go in for transfer, full bladder, nervous. And he comes back and sits and he's like, I don't know what happened during the transfer, but they said we did it wrong and air got in and they can't tell if any of these are healthy or not.
Oh, no.
So I said, well, what are we supposed to do? And he was like, well, I know what I'm doing. And I think that, they did it wrong. So I think all these are fine. But the healthiest looked to be whatever. He took 3 of them. And so we just sat in there and prayed, like, what kind of decision is that to put on someone? I could possibly have a child with cystic fibrosis, which is a very deadly, terrible disease, right? And so selfishly, like, do I want to have this child? Unselfishly, like, that's a terrible life for everyone involved, and not to mention the costs and everything that comes with it. So I decided, we just prayed and we're like, you know what, we're going to leave it in God's hands. Let's do the transfer, see what happens. The transfer goes through. I think it was around somewhere between 6 and 9 weeks. They're taking your labs and doing all this. And they called while I was at work on probably one of the craziest work days ever. I run outside, take the call, and they're like, we're sorry to inform you, but your levels no longer support a pregnancy. You've lost all of the triplets.
Oh.
I had to swallow that lump. Nobody to talk to because it was hidden for me. I didn't talk to him. I went back into work and but I knew that was probably one of the last things too for my marriage, honestly, because he wanted children very bad. That's why I wasn't laughing at your story, Doc. But when you're when you have you're in 2 different places, that can be a lot. That's a lot of turmoil, right? And he very badly wanted kids, and that failed. And then, there was just some conversation that went around, did I do something that caused it? Not me. That was coming from the other side. I shouldn't have did this or did that. And then you start building up resentment and it goes downhill from there. So we divorced, and I found, I started going to a new doctor, and she was like, oh, great. Where's the other 5 embryos? And I was like, oh, I didn't even stop to think of that at the time. So much happened. I called the doctor office back, like, hey, where are my embryos? And I believe in my soul that doctor was upset that I left and went down the hall to someone else. There was a lot of different things that happened. I was told the embryos were destroyed. And I was like, why were they destroyed? And he's like, well, they probably all had cystic fibrosis.
Oh, no.
You transferred 3 of those inside of me, telling me they were all fine. Now you destroyed them. And, I asked for paperwork to show me where I signed allowing them to even destroy them. They could never produce it. I didn't know then, like I know now, that was very much illegal, and there were a lot of conversations and things that could have been had, but it is what it is, and I'm where I'm at. For me, like you guys too, I had to just accept that it probably wasn't in the chapter for me anymore. I had to make that decision when to close that chapter of infertility treatments because my disease was too far. It became life-threatening in very different aspects, bowel blockages, and I had to let it go. And it was tough because I was in a relationship. Now I'm engaged. We're getting married next year. I know. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it was tough because I know he doesn't have children and he probably wants them, right? And so I'm back where I was, like, wow, I don't want to get someone resenting me because I can't give him this. And let's have some deep conversations. So we're sort of probably where Dr. Arielle is, where I would be okay with maybe adopting or something. He's no, if it's not biological, then it's not in the cards for me. And I teetered around a little bit with the foster aspect, I was a little scared there because, you know, the children there need a lot. They've been through a lot. You got to build that trust, and you don't know what all was back there, right? And that's I'm not at a place in my life where I have enough to give someone to get them through those emotional hurdles, and maybe not even because of my own childhood of adversity, probably not the best to get them through that. So we did have to just finally accept it may not be in the cards for us, and that's fine. We don't talk about it like you guys. I could be okay with maybe adopting, but like someone else mentioned, maybe it was you, Michelle, but when I saw the cost there where I landed, I felt like I was buying a baby. That's how it made me feel. I was like, my job offers tremendous resources towards it. But when I started thinking about 30,000, 60,000, going to China, going here, now I'm picking out like, oh, like, what do you want the DNA of the father to look like? And I'm building this child, or I'm trying to find this child, and I'm paying $60,000, $70,000 in medical and buying the mom groceries. And I don't know, like it just started to feel uncomfortable and heavy. Now I know please don't jump on me if you're watching this. I know there's probably legitimate costs, legal costs. I would be okay with legal costs. I would be okay with psychological evaluation costs, all the things. But somewhere in there, that line wasn't adding up, and I couldn't get enough transparency to see what it was for. I didn't feel comfortable. So we're just at a point where we're living our lives. We've just accepted it's probably not in the books for us. We have a fur baby. That's our baby. You know, yeah, exactly. And unlike you guys, I'm sorry to say that since I do have children, I don't want to say I don't know your pain. I know a little hint of it, but you know, hopefully maybe when the grandkids come, that'll suffice whatever opening I have. But I also want you to know, like, I'm sorry, and I don't want to come off like I'm not appreciative for what I have. I do, but yeah, it did have a little bit of that hurt as well. So I'm fortunate, but that's my journey. I do just kind of stay away from the topic a little bit, but maybe not as much as you guys. So.
Thank you. And for those who are listening or viewing us as we speak, and perhaps in the archives, these are some powerful women. When I say powerful in the sense that they're not giving up. As you see or hear their stories, and mine included, it's painful. And we're women who our organs are basically turning against us. We was put on earth to, well, I feel some people don't want kids, and that's fine. That's fine. But we still, even if you want them, we were born to create. That's just the truth of the matter, you know? And I believe whatever comfortable for you, whatever route, if you don't want any kids, that's okay. The most important thing is to find you and be happy. Be happy inside and to aspire towards greatness. And this is what I find, Tara, that the more someone tells me no, and I've had a lot of no's, the more situation get hectic and chaotic. And I had a lot of those, and I know you guys too. I have to have something to inspire me to keep on going. You know, yes. I don't want to go on out of hurt. I don't want to go on and just numb my feelings and don't deal with the issues that's in my heart, because I've never been married. I don't have any kids. And that's why I'm having this discussion. And that's why I'm talking about infertility for those who are listening. I'm just going to be real and raw. It hurts sometimes that you can't have kids, and you want to see how your child will look with your DNA and your partners. And I come to, I resolve that issue, you know, and I just say, I want to be happy, Tara. I want to be happy. I want to be happy mentally. And if I don't know what it's like to be in a relationship where he or she, whomever it is, your partner is, want a relationship, have kids. I don't know that. I don't know your pain. And for you to share that with us, I commend you. And I really appreciate it that you share that. I know it's hurtful. And I want to say sorry about that, your triplets. And that, I apologize. That's painful. Got to be. And let me ask you this. Is there statute of limitation, or you're just exhausted? You don't want to pursue this?
There's a statute of limitation. The same doctor, believe it or not, there was a surgeon here locally that had a similar experience. I don't know that it was purposely, but he and his wife's embryos were destroyed. And so he actually filed a lawsuit. And when I saw it and saw it was the same physician, I didn't want to make money off of it. I just said, I looked into it for myself. My statute of limitation was up. So I reached out and said, hey, if you need a witness or me to share mine that helps your case, I don't want anything out of it. I don't even care if I got awarded something, I would donate it to endometriosis. I just want someone to be held accountable for what happened. You know, and that was it. But yeah, the statute of limitations, they're up, and I just wish, sometimes I even think I should write a letter to him and let him know how he impacted my life, or to the medical board. But it's not out of vengeance, it's out of closure. You know, I want to let you know what you did, how you infected my life. I won't blame you for the divorce, but I'll certainly say that did not help. And because of some of the things I went through, infections were involved that, you know, furthered and contributed to my disease being as bad as it was. So by the time I got in the right hands, it was too late for me. But yeah, I actually pray for him too. I pray because I don't know who else he's touched or whatever, and I just pray at some point he's made aware of what he did. And if it was an accident, I would be fine with that. But there's a lot of details I didn't show, you know, that back up my thoughts on that. And so I'm at peace with it. I believe that there's something greater than us that will take care of wrong, and I don't live my life dwelling on it or thinking about it. But I do at some point need to just let the